I think we have a very constructive view on the Chinese economy. I wouldn't necessarily term it as a slowdown. It's a series of transitions. Transitions, as you well know, from external demand to more domestically focused, from export to consumer, from manufacturing to services, all those transitions underway. And we see real progress being made in all of those. Now, anytime you have transitions of those scales, even one of them, you're going to have some volatility.
Yeah, that was Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England and the Chairman of the G20 Financial Stability Board, talking about China's economy. Welcome back. We're discussing China's 13th five-year plan and the upcoming session of the National People's Congress as well. Stephen Roach in Yale, I'd like to pick it up with you. Just before the break, Pingkang was talking about the supply side economics, part of the reforms in China. Part of it, obviously, is cutting capacity. He talked about zombie industries. What industries are being hit? And obviously that has a lot of effects on the workers in those industries. And how is China trying to manage this change?
Well, the industries that are being singled out are the ones already mentioned, but especially coal and steel, where there's a lot of excess capacity, and headcount reductions are expected in those two industries alone of around 2 million workers. And, you know, the government is sensitive to headcount reductions given its social stability concerns. But, you know, while I certainly subscribe to the notion to take out redundant capacity, I just want to underscore the fact that in no economy, whether it was the U.S. In the 1980s or Japan in the late 1990s, headcount reduction, cost-cutting, elimination of inefficient capacity is not a recipe for long-term sustainable economic growth. It is a necessary removal of unproductive excess for a short period of time, but you've got to follow that up with a focus on renewed growth, innovation, and productivity-enhancing research, development, and investment. And China, through, you know, Made in China 2025, Internet Plus, is mindful of that, but you have to make certain that the balance between taking out inefficient capacity does not overwhelm the process of innovations-led growth.
Stephen Perry in London, I want you to pick up on that and expand, because obviously if we're moving away from one sort of economy into another, a service-based economy, a consumption-based economy, that's going to have implications for China domestically, but also in terms of what it exports as well. One only has to look at the sort of growth of Huawei within China and outside China, the big telecommunications giant Alibaba. What sort of implications do you see within China and also its trade with the rest of the world?
Well, I think there's a lot of change coming down the line. You're already seeing some signs of it. I think the points Stephen Roach were making there are very appropriate. When you talk about Reagan, you know, that brought in an era of financial capitalism. A great deal of the GDP switched towards financial services and financial markets. And what you've seen in China in the last few weeks on the stock markets is a statement from China that it's going to stay to agriculture, manufacturing, and the service industry, and the role of the financial services will be to support those sectors, not to be a profitable center in itself in the way that it has in the States and the UK. But what this means for the world is the emergence of Chinese global companies, multinational corporations. And is the world ready for them? Well, to some extent it is, but it's mainly in a negative attitude position of trying to restrain the arrival of Chinese multinational corporations taking market share. What's going to happen in time is that people are going to come to terms with the existence and arrival of Chinese companies, as they did with Japanese and German and other companies, and work out how the world markets will be shared. But for the Chinese to be successful in becoming global companies, it's the point Stephen Roach was just making about innovation. Innovation is the key. They have to close the technology gap between Chinese companies and Western companies. Will the Chinese do it? Well, I think when the Chinese government and the Chinese party put innovation as the first word in the five-year plan, you're hearing what they're going to prioritize. Yes. And what I always say to people who say to me that China never told us they were going to do it, China is telling us what they're going to do. They're going to innovate.
It's all there in black and white. Very, very interesting. Let's bring you, Pingkang, back from Shanghai. You also talked about, and Stephen Roach has talked about a social safety net, but earlier you also talked about eradication of poverty. There is an income gap in China and also a gap between rural and urban. How is the government and the party going to push forward with this idea of a moderately prosperous society by 2020?
Well, first of all, can I add a couple points, and just one point to the supply side and innovation versus innovation that two Stevens just mentioned, right? So then, the innovation, of course, is extremely important, and that also represents the future. But then, what happened in China right now is that some of the sectors have already sucked in a lot of resources, and then the resource are clogged and got locked in those sectors. So and the system itself does not release resources by itself to more productive sectors. That's why the supply side reform comes in. So I think that both supply side reform and innovation are equally important to the Chinese problem right now. And then for the poverty alleviation, I think that it has more to do with income redistribution, and in particular, then how to spend the tax revenue more wisely. But of course, we need to have a transparent budgeting system first. Then also, after that, then to spend those tax revenues not just only to subsidize the people in poverty, particularly in the rural area, but more invest in them, invest in the future to increase the human capital, for example, to have establishment, to improve the educational system and also workforce training system in the rural area so that they can have more income in the future.
Thanks so much for that. I want to bring in the two Stevens again with the same question. Let's start with Stephen Roach in Yale. This plan has a backdrop where global growth isn't so great as well. How do you think Chinese growth plans and development plans are contributing to the regional and global development? There's also, of course, the One Belt, One Road initiative coming out of China as well.
Well, I think that's a very important question. The global economy is extraordinarily weak right now, 7 years after the crisis. And so the deficiency of global demand relative to its pre-crisis trend raises big issues about for economies who are dependent on exports, like China has been, but other Asian economies as well, as the sustenance for economic growth. This is why the shift in China is so vitally important, not just for its own growth model, but for its major trading partners. If China is successful in creating a new middle class, a new consumer-led growth dynamic, that's an enormous new source of global aggregate demand for the world and Asia to benefit from, provided they can have access to domestic Chinese markets. And that's a key issue to be negotiated in terms of future trade liberalization. But all this focus on the supply side, while I don't dismiss it at all, doesn't really touch the big gorilla, and that's the deficiency of aggregate demand in this post-crisis world. And China shares in that problem, and hopefully will address that with its own rebalancing and structural change.
Stephen Perry, can you pick up on that? But also, can I throw a couple more things in the mix? Obviously, there's an anti-corruption drive also in China. There is a green initiative, which also puts a question mark over certain aspects of economic growth. And we're having the social safety net and rebalancing as well. Can all this be done at once?
If I had an hour to answer that, I could. I think the point is this, is that China's Gini coefficient somewhere around about 4.9, the States about 4.2, Denmark about 2.5. I would say that if we think in terms of China moving from where it is towards Denmark over the next 30, 40 years, we get a sense of this redistribution of wealth of China more fairly amongst the people. At the same time, the market economy, which is the basis for innovation, the accumulation of capital, the reward for innovation, sets in train the sorts of motivations that we see in Western capitalist societies. So you've got these two things pulling at each other. It's the job of the government and the party to manage those two tendencies towards conflict. If you look at the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road, the possibility there of $1 trillion a year of demand as the roads basic infrastructure is built, probably $50 trillion altogether over the next 30 or 40 years. And if you take the question of the emergence of the Chinese middle class and the Chinese middle class demand, Stephen Roach is absolutely right. It depends a lot on creating the proper welfare state. That will be put in place over the next 4 or 5 years. I think they're quite clear as to what they're going to do there. And if the middle class in China do become a real demand market, and there's no reason why they shouldn't, that will also have an effect on the position of the RMB as a world reserve currency. So there's a lot out there that's much bigger issues that are contained in a 5-year plan or a 1-year plan. The journey of China towards its destination is really underway, and they're going through the next phase of change. It'll be a bit rocky as they go along, but it's a pretty good opportunity. I mean, there's nowhere in the world, maybe except possibly India, which has got this kind of growth rate and this kind of population. So it takes some time to just work it out.